Tonight, under the lights of Las Vegas, something is about to happen that no one could have predicted. Two worlds collide, and the outcome will surprise everyone. Stay with us until the end. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The MGM Grand Arena in Las Vegas was alive with light, sound, and the restless hum of thousands of spectators. The atmosphere resembled a storm about to break. Dazzling spotlights swept across the packed audience. Voices rose and fell in waves, and the echo of music vibrated through the structure. This was more than an ordinary show. It was a carefully orchestrated charity event, designed to bring entertainment, glamour, and a spectacle worth remembering. In the center of it all stood the cage, polished and ready, its steel frame glowing under the bright lamps. The cage was the symbol of the evening, the place where the line between theater and demonstration would blur, and where the tension of personalities would eventually explode. When Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson made his entrance, the reaction was immediate. The crowd erupted in cheers, a roar that spread like fire through the tiers of the arena. His presence was magnetic, commanding attention with every step. Wearing a tailored suit that accentuated his muscular frame, he looked like the embodiment of confidence and power. His trademark smile and controlled swagger suggested that this was his stage, his world, and that the audience was his to entertain. He raised his arms, soaking in the adoration, and for a moment, the energy of the entire arena seemed to revolve around him. But as he walked across the stage, his eyes found someone seated near the front rows. There, calm and motionless, was Steven Seagal. Dressed in traditional attire, his kimono a quiet contrast to the flashing lights, Seagal did not react to the roar of the crowd or the magnetic presence of Johnson. His face was composed, eyes partially hidden behind tinted glasses, and his posture carried the weight of self-assurance. He seemed entirely detached from the noise around him, as though the spectacle existed in another world, one that didn't concern him. The contrast between the flamboyant entrance of Johnson and the unmoving stillness of Seagal was so stark that the audience could not help but notice. Johnson, feeding on the cheers, decided to play with the moment. Grinning broadly, he gestured toward Seagal. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out with theatrical emphasis, his voice booming across the arena. "We have a legend here tonight. The one and only Steven Seagal. A man from the movies, though. I'm not so sure about the fighting part." His tone was playful, meant to elicit laughter, and the audience responded with chuckles and applause. The Rock's charisma thrived on moments like these, when humor and bravado blended seamlessly into entertainment. The camera quickly found Seagal, projecting his image onto the massive screens above the arena. For a brief second, the crowd waited for a reaction. Would he smile? Would he shake his head? Would he respond? Yet Seagal remained as he was, calm, silent, and unmoved. His lack of expression seemed to stretch into the air like a cold current, creating a strange unease that clashed with the festive mood. The laughter from the crowd faltered slightly, though Johnson pushed on with another playful gesture, trying to ignite more cheers. The Rock thrived on noise, on the back and forth with the public, but Seagal's refusal to play along created a subtle shift in the atmosphere. What began as a joke now carried the faint sting of tension. The audience sensed it. Even those who laughed at Johnson's comment found themselves glancing back at Seagal's face, reading the absence of reaction as something deliberate, almost challenging. The calmness of the man in the kimono seemed heavier than words, and in that silence lay an unspoken contrast, the fire of charisma against the ice of control. For Johnson, the moment was still part of the act. He spread his arms wide, smiling at the audience, basking in the applause, while occasionally glancing again toward Seagal as though to test the waters. Yet behind the bravado, a spark of curiosity stirred. The Rock was a performer, a showman who thrived on exaggerated gestures and playful rivalry. But here was someone who refused to yield to that rhythm. Seagal's stillness wasn't an act, and the crowd could feel it. The evening moved forward, but the seed of tension had been planted. The audience had witnessed a meeting of opposites, a theatrical challenge without words. It was clear to everyone watching that something deeper was taking shape, something that might soon step beyond jokes and playful remarks. What began as light-hearted entertainment now carried the weight of anticipation. As Johnson continued his performance, moving effortlessly between charm and humor, all eyes occasionally returned to the man who had not moved, who had not smiled, who had not played along. By the time the first part of the show drew toward its midpoint, the audience was divided between the dazzling presence of The Rock and the mysterious silence of Seagal. The cage at the center of the arena seemed to wait, patient and ominous, like a stage hungry for confrontation. The energy in the MGM Grand was shifting, the laughter mixing with a growing sense of suspense. The clash of two philosophies, noise and stillness, spectacle and control, was inevitable, though no one yet knew how it would unfold. The Rock exited the stage briefly, leaving the audience buzzing, but the image of his playful taunt lingered. The crowd's curiosity was no longer directed only toward Johnson's charisma. It was fixed on the quiet man who had refused to react. Seagal's silence had spoken louder than any retort, and though the show continued, every spectator felt the pull of what was to come. The midway point of the evening had arrived, and the hum of the MGM Grand Arena grew louder with each passing second. The lights dimmed slightly, music thundered through the speakers, and the spotlight returned to the center cage. The announcer's voice, full of practiced excitement, echoed through the hall, telling the audience that the charity event would now feature a live demonstration of skill. The crowd roared, eager to see what would unfold. This was no longer just about celebrities walking the stage. It was about combat, even if framed as entertainment. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson stepped forward first, his confidence radiating as brightly as the stage lights themselves. He wore no suit this time, but training clothes that showed every muscle, every vein, every ounce of his imposing physique. He grinned, flexed, and played to the cameras, the consummate entertainer who knew how to hold an audience. "You want a show?" he shouted, his voice booming across the arena. The crowd erupted again. He nodded, soaking in their energy, then pounded his chest with a fist, as though to seal a promise. The cage door opened, and all eyes turned. Entering slowly, measured and without theatrics, was Steven Seagal. He moved with a quiet certainty, his black kimono tied neatly, prayer beads resting around his neck. His expression was neutral, his pace unhurried, and the crowd immediately sensed the shift in atmosphere. Where Johnson thrived on energy and spectacle, Seagal's very presence seemed to draw the noise inward, turning excitement into suspense. The arena that moments ago shook with cheers suddenly felt tighter, quieter, as though thousands of people were holding their breath at once. The two men faced each other in the center of the cage. Johnson stood tall, bouncing slightly on his feet, grinning with a mix of confidence and provocation. Seagal stood rooted, arms relaxed at his sides, body still as stone. There was no smile, no sign of nerves, only calm awareness in his stance. The contrast was striking: movement against stillness, noise against silence, bravado against discipline. The referee signaled for the demonstration to begin. Johnson moved first, closing the distance with explosive energy. His steps were wide, purposeful, filled with the flair of a man who knew he was being watched. The crowd cheered wildly as he threw the first playful strike. A broad, theatrical jab meant as much for entertainment as for contact. Seagal barely shifted. His hand rose almost lazily, redirecting the punch with effortless precision. Johnson stumbled half a step, surprised at the sudden loss of balance, though he quickly recovered with a booming laugh. "You're quick," he muttered under his breath, circling again. The next attempt carried more force, a heavier combination thrown with his natural strength and practiced showmanship. Johnson's movements were explosive, each strike designed to wow the crowd. But Seagal met them the same way he had met the first: calm, efficient, devoid of any wasted effort. A twist of the wrist here, a shift of the hips there, and Johnson's momentum turned against him. The crowd gasped as they saw the difference. Where Johnson's movements were loud, Seagal's responses were quiet. Where one demanded attention, the other commanded control. Johnson, still smiling but now breathing harder, tried to mask his surprise. He charged forward again, faster, sharper. The arena shook with cheers, but again, Seagal did not match speed with speed. Instead, he absorbed the force, used angles, and guided Johnson's aggression into emptiness. One sudden turn of the body, and Johnson found himself forced off balance, his footing lost, his size and power working against him. The audience reacted with a wave of astonishment. For a brief moment, the camera zoomed in on Seagal's face. Still calm, still unmoving, his eyes fixed on his opponent with quiet certainty. He did not gloat, did not smile. He simply carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had done this countless times before. His silence said more than any taunt could. "You cannot shake me." The Rock, regaining his balance, stood up straight and shook his head with a grin, playing off the moment. "All right," he said loudly, letting the crowd hear him. "This guy's the real deal." The arena erupted again, though the laughter now had an edge of respect. The audience could feel it too. This was no longer a game of jokes. It was a test, and Seagal was in control. Minutes stretched longer as Johnson tried again and again, throwing his strength and speed into every attempt. Yet each time, Seagal responded with measured precision, redirecting strikes, guiding momentum, neutralizing aggression without ever appearing rushed. His style was unlike anything the audience was used to seeing. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. Even the untrained eyes in the crowd could see that Johnson's power was being undone not by greater strength, but by mastery of control. The cheers softened into murmurs of awe. The audience was beginning to realize that what they were watching was not just entertainment. It was a clash of philosophies, a battle of approaches. The Rock's charisma and energy filled the air, but Seagal's silence and skill bent the space around him. The noise of the crowd grew into a mix of excitement and disbelief. As the sequence slowed, the referee stepped between them, raising his hand to signal a pause. The crowd applauded wildly, the arena vibrating once again with noise. But the undertone had shifted. Johnson raised his hands to the crowd, grinning through his sweat, his chest heaving, playing the role of the entertainer to the very end. Seagal, by contrast, merely adjusted the beads on his neck and gave the slightest of nods. The first direct meeting between them was over, but its impact hung heavy in the air. The contrast between noise and silence, between spectacle and mastery, had revealed itself with clarity. The Rock had entertained, but Seagal had demonstrated. The tension that began as playful mockery was evolving into something deeper, something the audience could feel in their bones. The arena lights shifted again, music thundered through the speakers, and the announcer returned to hype the next phase of the event. But as the men stepped away from the center of the cage, every spectator knew that the heart of the evening had only just begun. The energy of the MGM Grand had changed. The crowd had laughed earlier, but now they waited with something sharper anticipation mixed with awe and a growing hunger to see where this confrontation would lead. The MGM Grand was now a storm contained within walls. The earlier excitement had turned into something electric, charged with the weight of what everyone had just seen. The audience wasn't simply entertained anymore. They were restless, murmuring to each other, pointing toward the cage, replaying in their minds how a single man's calm could so easily neutralize explosive power. The Rock had entered the arena as the unquestioned showman, but now the shadow of Seagal's quiet efficiency loomed large over the night. Back at ringside, Marcus Vega, the brash young fighter who had won his earlier match with flashy aggression, leaned over the barrier, his confidence written on every line of his body. He smirked toward the cage, microphone in hand, calling out loudly enough for the cameras to catch every word. "That's it? Redirecting punches from an old man? Come on, this is 2025, not the 1980s. Show me something real." The crowd reacted instantly, half cheering for the young star, half booing at his disrespect. Johnson laughed and pointed toward Seagal as though to say, "Now you've got another challenger." The commentators in their booth exchanged glances, sensing the growing fire. One of them leaned toward the mic. This could spiral fast. Vega doesn't respect what he's seen, but Seagal's patience has already spoken volumes. Seagal stood at the edge of the cage, his face unchanged, his breathing steady. He had not risen to Johnson's taunts, and now he gave Vega nothing either. Silence. No words, no gestures. Just stillness that cut through the roar of the crowd like a blade. But Vega wasn't satisfied with silence. He vaulted over the barricade, ducked past hesitant security, and stormed into the cage with reckless bravado. The audience exploded with noise, some cheering, some screaming warnings. Inside, Vega bounced on his feet, young and explosive, circling like a predator who had already convinced himself of victory. "Let's see it, old man," he shouted. "Show the world what makes you so special." Johnson, still catching his breath from his own exchange, grinned and leaned against the cage, eager to watch the chaos unfold. The atmosphere had shifted completely. What began as playful had now turned into a challenge with teeth. The referee tried to intervene, but the roar of the crowd drowned him out. The promoters, sensing the viral potential of the moment, hesitated before giving the signal to let it play. Vega charged first, his youthful speed cutting through the cage like lightning. He unleashed a flurry of kicks and punches, each one sharp, fast, and aggressive. But Seagal didn't back away. His stance remained rooted, his movements small but precise, absorbing Vega's energy and redirecting it with minimal effort. A palm strike stopped Vega's momentum cold, sending him stumbling backward, his grin faltering. The audience gasped. Johnson's smile slipped just slightly, his entertainer's mask cracking as he realized this wasn't going to be the one-sided display Vega had promised. Vega recovered quickly, shouting, "Lucky shot!" before surging forward again. Seagal shifted his weight, guiding Vega's momentum into emptiness. A twist of the wrist sent the younger fighter spinning, his own force used against him. The crowd roared in disbelief. There were no acrobatics, no flashy spins, just simple, ruthless efficiency. Vega scrambled up, red-faced, his bravado shaken but not yet broken. The commentators whispered with intensity now. This is mastery. No wasted energy, no theatrics. Just decades of control against raw speed. The Rock leaned closer from outside the cage, his booming voice filling the air. Careful, kid. You're not just fighting another entertainer here. That man's lived this his whole life. His words carried more weight now, tinged with an unease he couldn't hide. Vega, furious, launched one last desperate barrage. He feinted a kick, and then drove forward with a looping punch meant to end it in one strike. But Seagal's eyes never wavered. In a single fluid motion, he stepped offline, redirected the punch, and delivered a short, devastating strike to Vega's center. The young fighter collapsed, gasping. The air ripped from his lungs. The arena froze. Thousands of voices fell silent at once, the sudden stillness heavier than any roar. Medical staff rushed in, crouching by Vega's side. He was conscious, but his chest heaved as he struggled to breathe, humiliation etched across his face. Johnson stepped forward, no longer grinning, his earlier bravado replaced with something more complex. Respect mixed with unease. He looked at Seagal, who had not moved since the final strike. His posture was unchanged, his face unreadable, his kimono still neat. The crowd found its voice again, but it wasn't laughter or cheers of mockery. It was awe. The chant started low, then grew louder, echoing through the entire arena. "Seagal! Seagal! Seagal!" The sound rattled the cage, washing over Johnson, over Vega, over the entire event itself. The Rock lifted a microphone, his voice quieter now, almost serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, maybe we all just learned something tonight. Maybe we all just got reminded what real strength looks like." He looked back at Seagal, shaking his head slightly, as though admitting that the evening had slipped from his control. Seagal gave no acknowledgement to the chant, no sign of pride. He simply adjusted his beads, his silence saying more than words ever could. The lesson had been delivered, not through speeches or bravado, but through the economy of movement and the calm of a man who had nothing left to prove. The cameras lingered on him as the arena continued to erupt. What began as a spectacle was turning into something else entirely. This wasn't just about fighting anymore, it was about philosophy, about mastery versus performance, about silence overpowering noise. The line between entertainment and truth had blurred, and the world had just witnessed the difference. The night in Las Vegas had burned itself into memory, but the dawn brought clarity. The Strip glittered in gold and amber as the sun rose, and the MGM Grand stood like a monument to what had unfolded only hours earlier. The arena's seats were empty now, swept clean by workers who found scraps of confetti and discarded programs. the remnants of an event that had gone far beyond its scripted intentions. Across the city, the footage had already taken on a life of its own. Social media platforms exploded with clips of the confrontation, from The Rock's booming taunts to Marcus Vega's collapse under Seagal's palm strike. Headlines screamed across every corner of the internet. The lesson in silence. Seagal redefines strength. The night flash fell to substance. Donations to the charity skyrocketed, surpassing every projection. What had been planned as a night of spectacle had turned into a cultural phenomenon. In a luxury suite high above the Strip, Johnson sat on the edge of his bed, scrolling through his phone. Messages poured in from agents, producers, and publicists. Talk shows offered prime slots. Networks begged for exclusives. His following had surged by millions overnight. Yet the comments beneath the viral videos told a different story. They spoke less about Johnson's charisma and more about the quiet dominance of the man he had mocked. Respect is earned in silence. This is what humility looks like. Seagal just taught us all a lesson. For the first time in his career, Johnson felt something rare, a loss of control over the narrative. He had built an empire on showmanship, on always being the loudest and brightest presence in any room. Yet, in a single night, he had been overshadowed by stillness. He set his phone down, staring out at the waking city. His agent sent another message, insisting on interviews. Johnson typed back only 2 words. Not yet. Across town, Marcus Vega was in a gym. His strikes echoed against the heavy bag, each one sharp, efficient, stripped of the flourish that had defined his career. Gone was the cocky swagger. Sweat poured down his body as he drilled fundamentals again and again. His coach watched quietly, noting the shift. Different today, the coach said. Marcus didn't stop. I've been training to look good, not to be good, he admitted between breaths. That ends now. The humiliation of the previous night still burned in him, but it had transformed into something else. Hunger for true growth. The cameras and endorsements could wait. He wanted what Seagal had mastery, that didn't need an audience. And Seagal himself? In a modest suite at a quieter hotel, he rose with the same routine he had followed for decades. Meditation, breathing, stretching, disciplines ingrained so deeply they were part of his being. He ignored the flood of requests and calls. Fame, headlines, and viral clips meant nothing. What mattered was the practice, the constant refinement, the way of life he had walked since youth. When informed that the charity had quadrupled its fundraising, he nodded with quiet satisfaction. That was enough. Later that evening, a private dining room hosted an unusual gathering. Johnson, Marcus, Seagal, and Samantha Lee, the commentator whose words had framed the night, sat together without cameras, without publicists, without spectacle. Johnson raised his glass first, speaking not as a persona, but as a man. To lessons learned, he said simply. Seagal inclined his head, the faintest of smiles ghosting across his face. Marcus broke the silence, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard it. That move you used on me, it didn't look like anything. But it felt like getting hit by a truck. How is that possible? Seagal studied him for a long moment before answering. Efficiency. No wasted energy. No movement for show. Marcus swallowed, his pride stripped bare. Can you teach me? That depends, Seagal replied evenly. Are you willing to train without an audience? To practice for years with no applause, no spotlight, no reward except discipline? Marcus hesitated, then nodded. Yes. The Rock chuckled, shaking his head. All these years, I've been the loudest man in every room. Last night, I got completely overshadowed by someone who didn't say a word. That's real power. Seagal's response was simple. Words are overrated. Strength speaks for itself. The night deepened, and as they parted ways, Seagal handed Marcus a small card with an address. Texas, my dojo. 1 month, no cameras. Marcus accepted it with reverence. For the first time, he wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing mastery. In the days that followed, the story of The Lesson continued to spread. But its true impact wasn't measured in views or headlines. It lived in the quiet shifts of those who had witnessed it. Johnson began speaking with humility in his public appearances, often pointing to Seagal as the embodiment of true strength. Marcus vanished from social media, later returning as a transformed, fighterless Flash, more substance, devastating in his precision. And Seagal? He returned to his ranch, to teaching, to the discipline that had defined his life. His legend had grown, but he carried it lightly, unchanged by the noise around him. For him, the night in Las Vegas was not a triumph, but a reminder that true strength never needed to announce itself. As the chants of Seagal faded into memory, what remained was the essence of the lesson. Mastery over ego, silence over spectacle, substance over flash. In a world drowning in noise, the quiet presence of one man had spoken louder than all the lights and voices on the strip. What you've just seen is only the beginning of a story that will be remembered for a long time. The real question is what comes next. Don't miss it. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you are watching from.